a 21-day fasting and prayer devotional by the City Gate Church. Our emphasis for this week is love of the brethren. Be blessed.
Good morning. You're welcome to today's devotion. Yesterday, we looked at charity. We looked at the attributes of charity as described in 1 Corinthians 13. And we were able to establish that a spiritual man is a man of charity. And that as we learn Christ, one of the things is that at the peak of the learning of Christ, we become a man of charity. So this morning we'll be looking at some of the attributes of a man of charity as described in 1 Corinthians 13. The first one that we'll be considering is charity suffers long and is kind. It's not just about forbearing people, but forbearing and being kind at the same time. Let's look at Colossians chapter 3 verse 13. It says, bearing with one another and forgiving one another. If one has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. You can't forbear if you don't forgive. As we begin to learn Christ, one of the things that Christ teaches us is how to forgive, how to remit people's sin, and then forbear them. And in the process of forbearing your brother's weakness or infirmities, you are still kind towards that person. So it's not just only forbearing, but actually being kind. Some people could have the grace to forbear, patience, bear maybe their brother infirmities or weakness, but to be kind at the same time while you are forbearing, that shows that you are a spiritual person. It's a sign of spirituality. So, and as we learn Christ, that's one of the things that begins to happen to us. It's not just forbearing, but also being kind. Let's look at Romans 12, verse 20. It says, beloved, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So, even if someone is doing something that is hurting, what is expected of us as believers, as a spiritual being, is that you are still kind towards the person as you forbear that person. Let's look at Romans 12:14 as well. It says, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Those are some of the attributes. Then Romans 12:10 says, be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love. So it's not just forbearing, but also being kind towards one another. 1 Peter 3:9 talks about not rendering evil for evil. So when someone is doing something, so to say, negative or maybe bad, the natural tendencies are to also retaliate. One of the ways to respond is to show kindness, is to show love. The next one we'll be looking at is love does not envy. Let's look at Romans 12:15. It says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. One of the ways in which we can overcome envy is that when any good thing happens to your brother, you actually celebrate your brother. That is an antidote to envy. So as we begin to learn Christ, a sign of becoming spiritual is that love does not envy. Rather, you will rejoice with them that rejoice, and you will weep with them that weep. Romans chapter 12 also saying that we should prefer one another. It said, be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor or giving preference to one another. So even when your brother is doing well, it's a good act that you prefer your brother. You celebrate your brother. You do not pull them down. You do not envy. You're not envious. Then let's look at love does not parade itself and is not puffed up. A sign that we are becoming spiritual is that we are becoming more humble. Jesus said, learn of me, for I am meek and lowly. If you are truly learning Christ, you will be like him. And if you look at the life of Jesus, he was not a man that used to parade himself. He would do miracles and would tell those people that you should tell no man. He was not blowing his own trumpet. Why they even wanted to make him king, he had to withdraw, because he was not a man that loved to vaunt himself, that loved to parade himself. Despite all he knew, despite all the things he had, Jesus was still a lowly man. That's why I said, learn of me. I am meek and lowly. And I've learned in Ephesians 4 verse 20. So he says, if you have learned of me. So some of the things we would learn, in our learning of Christ, one of the things that will happen to us is that we come to a place whereby we do not parade ourselves and we are not humble. Let's look at James 5:6. Says, therefore, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. So, humility is one of the things that is worked in us as we begin to learn Christ. Let's also look at Romans 12 verse 3. Romans 12 actually brings a whole lot of instructions on how to relate with one another. It says, "For I say through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith." So love does not parade itself, and it is not puffed up. We even see Jesus said he humbled himself. He became a man of no reputation. Despite all his reputation, he laid down his reputation. He humbled himself even to the death on the cross. So when we learn Christ, a believer that is learning Christ, does not parade himself and is not puffed up. Next thing to look at is love does not behave rudely. Let's look at 1 Timothy verse 12. It's an injunction that we should be an example of believer, not just only in words, also in action. So as a believer, our conduct must be that depicts a believer. So let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. I want to talk about in conduct and in word. So not just only in words, but also in our conduct. Love does not behave itself rudely. He honors all men. No part of not behaving rudely is to have honor for men in your heart. 1 Pt.2 17 talks about honoring all men. Honoring all men, all men. And as believers, we must let our light shine. Matthew 5:14-16 talks about let your light so shine, so that when people see your good works, they will glorify your Father in heaven. The early disciples, people saw them, they saw their conduct, and by that they were able to say that they had been with Christ. As I have said, the learning of Christ peaks in charity, and one of the attributes is that it does not behave itself rudely. In conduct, my prayer is that the signs of the nature of learning Christ will actually be on us, that we would indeed be an example of a believer in words, in conduct, in love, in purity. That the Lord will teach us how to humble ourselves, how to lowly in heart, how not to be puffed up with the things that we are learning. That the Lord will teach us how not to envy, how to love our brother sincerely from our heart, rejoicing with them when they rejoice, preferring one another. And the Lord will grant us, as we learn Christ, with the capacity to forbear one another, capacity to be patient with one another as we all journey towards perfection. And as we are patient towards another, also being affectionately kind towards another. These are my prayers this morning. The Lord bless.
Thank you for listening. Please make use of the scriptures cited in the devotional and meditate on them through the day. Enjoy a grace-filled day.